This is modern-day Turkey. The nation that was once called the sick man of Europe has grown to become more powerful than anyone would have ever thought.
That Turkey remains a close NATO ally and our military-to-military relationship remains strong.
The previous administration made some very big mistakes with regard to Turkey, and it was too bad.
Our interest here is clear, which is in cementing Turkey as much as we can and the Turkish people with us in the transatlantic and NATO family.
I actually have a very nice job in Turkey. He's saying, please mention Turkey. Okay.
We have assurance measures in Turkey, meaning that we have military presence, AWACS, increased naval presence, we will have air policing and so on to make sure that we are able to defend all allies against any aggression, of course also including Turkey.
The US economy dropped by 2.8% in 2020, while the United Kingdom's economy plummeted by 11% and the European Union by 5.68%. But the Turkish economy kept growing, a 1.9% increase from 2019.
Geopolitically, Turkey's position is very interesting. It is perhaps one of the most controversial members of the NATO alliance. For a long time, it has blocked Sweden's NATO membership because of alleged support for a Kurdish separatist group. Turkey has been fighting these separatists through constant military attacks on northern Syria. This is a difficult situation because the United States actually supports some Kurdish factions. Meanwhile, Turkey has problems with Greece over marine territory, raising the risks of a conflict between these two NATO members. In external affairs, the government in Ankara doesn't always choose NATO's side. President Erdogan has called Israel a terror state, even though Europe and the US supports the Israelis. And interestingly, Turkey is one of the few NATO countries which hasn't placed sanctions on Russia. In short, Turkey doesn't always do what the other NATO members want it to do. But the country brings one thing to the table, which makes it a crucial member of the alliance. The country has been gaining geopolitical, military, and economic strength. Through a network of strategic alliances, Turkey is competing with Iran and the Arab states for regional leadership. The country also has an emerging economy, which is relatively successful in its region despite its current struggles. Turkey ranks 11th globally when it comes to GDP at purchase power parity, beating all other countries in its proximity except Russia. Population-wise, Turkey has 85 million people, which is only behind Iran, Russia, and Egypt in the region. Its population is slowly growing and is expected to hit 100 million in 2040. What also helps is Turkey's military strength. It is the second biggest in NATO in terms of active personnel, with over 350,000 people in the military service. The country's defense industry is largely self-sufficient, and Turkey has become a net arms exporter. Finally, there's also a huge political push in Turkey to become a regional leader. This is because of the nationalist government in the country led by President Erdogan. In this video, we'll go over the rise of Turkey and how it could become one of the world's regional powers.
It's a great honor to be with President Erdogan. The president and I we've been very good friends. We've been friends for a long time, almost from day one. I'm a big fan of the president. You're doing a fantastic job for the people of Turkey. I have to say that President Erdogan was very good.
Turkey's economy continues to boom. Gross domestic product grew more than expected in the third quarter. It expanded by almost 4.5%.
The country with the sharpest increase in military spending was Turkey.
In the air, on land, and at sea, we will work harder to produce more domestically to meet the needs of our security forces. We will not stop until our country is at the global position it deserves to be in every field.
At the beginning of this century, Turkey focused on being friendly instead of being tough. This approach was called the zero problems policy, meaning that Turkey didn't want to get involved in wars. By doing this, the country hoped to gain popularity and goodwill in the region. As one of the few countries in the world which has both a Muslim majority and a democracy, Turkey has a unique selling point. It could become an example for others in the region. But this all changed near the end of 2010 when the Arab Spring protests erupted. These were anti-government protests all over the Middle East, resulting in the overthrow of some governments. Erdogan, then prime minister, strategically toured across the region in 2011. He supported the protesters, saying that the people's will is at the core of Turkey's politics in the region. But soon, the Arab Spring protests evolved into wars all over the Middle East. In this period of unrest, Turkey's zero problems policy wasn't really viable anymore. In times of conflict, it's hard to be friends with everyone. That's why the country has switched to military strength to achieve its regional ambitions. Although Turkey has always been a military power to be reckoned with, this has only become more true over the last few years. Apart from more than the 350,000 people in the active personnel, it also ranks second in NATO with the number of tanks. Currently, it has more than 2,000 of them. And in the area of combat drones, Turkey is arguably among the 3 best militaries globally. On top of that, around 80% of Turkey's military purchases are coming from domestic manufacturers. In various areas such as drones or missiles, Turkey is already fully self-sufficient. This means that foreign sanctions cannot hurt the country's military capabilities, a problem that Turkey has dealt with before. During the Cyprus war, NATO members placed an arms embargo on their ally. But when Turkey's defense industry becomes completely independent, this trick won't work anymore. Apart from giving Ankara more autonomy, a domestic defense industry also has other benefits. Turkey can sell weapons to other nations and create strategic partnerships that way. That's why President Erdogan wants to have $10 billion of arms exports in the near future. Last year, Turkey already exported a record number of $5.5 billion in arms. The Turkish Bayraktar drone has already played a big role in this. It has been sold to more than 20 countries. The United Arab Emirates made a $2 billion deal to purchase 120 Turkish drones, combined with equipment and training. Similarly, Saudi Arabia has also signed a huge drone contract. It was described as the biggest defense and aviation export contract in the history of the Republic of Turkey. The value of the deal hasn't been put out into the public, but it's likely much more than the $2 billion of drones sold to the UAE. And this incredibly successful Bayraktar drone project is just one of the 850 projects of the Turkish defense industry. In total, the sector has 3,000 companies with 80,000 employees. Apart from drones, they're also making progress with armored vehicles, artillery, rockets, and air defense systems. Last year, Turkey rolled out a new domestically produced main battle tank, called the Altay. It is also developing a new state-of-the-art attack helicopter. The same defense manufacturer is creating a 5th-generation fighter jet called the TF Khan to replace the Turkish Air Force's F-16s. Although the project is facing some challenges, it has already performed its first test flight. We can see some of the progress in Turkey's Navy. It has recently inaugurated its largest ever warship, the TCG Anadolu. The vessel was entirely manufactured in Turkey, although it wasn't designed there. On top of that, Ankara wants to build an aircraft carrier and 4 new frigates. The country's defense manufacturers are also looking at the future of warfare, as they're undertaking ambitious projects for unmanned combat vehicles and unmanned surface vessels. In short, the domestic defense industry of Turkey is making rapid strides forward. Erdogan is very proud of this, as it was one of the main talking points in his recent election campaign. Apart from industrial capabilities, though, there's another aspect of Turkey's military power. The country has been growing its forward military presence. In Cyprus, Qatar, and Somalia, it has permanent military bases. There are also military bases in Iraq and Syria. Besides that, Turkey has also signed defense agreements with 10 countries, like Tunisia, Montenegro, and Kazakhstan. This makes Turkey's military involved in all of its nearby regions, the Balkans, the Caucasus, and the Middle East. Combined with strong military power at home, Turkey hopes to become one of the regional leaders in security in this way. However, its military is facing one huge weakness, and that's the defense budget. If Turkey wants to have a mighty military with influence all over the region, it needs to spend way more than it currently does. The Turkish government planned to spend 150% more on its defense in 2024. The military budget is going to be around $40 billion, way more than the $16 billion budget in 2023. This would make Turkey one of the regional security leaders, but it's still nothing compared to the international giants. A budget of $40 billion doesn't even put Turkey in the top 10 globally. Not to mention that the US spends more than 20 times that amount. But Turkey can't really afford to spend more than this because of the economic problems. In general, the economy is one of the biggest limiting factors for Turkey's power. For years now, the country has been in an economic crisis. One of the symptoms of this economic downturn is the Turkish currency, which is in a free fall. In 2019, $1 was equal to about 6 Turkish lira. Now the exchange rate has jumped to about 33 lira per dollar. The effect on Turkey's consumer prices has also been dramatic, with the inflation rate hitting 85.5% at its peak in 2022. This was after years of inflation at rates between 10 and 25%. Right now, inflation is still over 60%. As a result, 2/3 of the people in Turkey are struggling to pay for food and rent. To make matters even worse, the country has been running at huge current account deficits. The current account measures how much money is going in and going out of a country in the form of trade and investment. As an emerging economy, you'd expect that Turkey has a lot of exports and foreign investments. But this is not the case. Last year, the deficit stood at $45.2 billion. Basically, Turkey is failing as an emerging economy. It's not competitive enough for international trade, as it's importing more than it's exporting. And the country is also not attractive enough for investments. Turkey has only been receiving about 1 to 2% of its GDP in foreign direct investments, which isn't enough to really spur economic growth. So Turkey is dealing with a lot of economic problems in the short term. But when we look at the country's fundamentals, well, the picture is much brighter. The country has a strategic location, a young and growing population, and a strong industrial base. A few decades from now, the Turkish economy could look a whole lot different.
After tense talks with the EU, Recep Tayyip Erdogan refused to comment. But the EU stressed that Turkey first had to uphold its end of a 2016 deal to host about 3.6 million refugees from Syria in return for EU aid.
Bugüne kadar olduğu gibi Ukrayna'nın yeniden imarı için gereken desteği vereceğimizi Sayın Zelenski ile paylaştım.
If Turkey wants to become a regional power, it obviously has to be strategic about its relationship with other countries. Let's first look at Turkey's position with the West. The diplomacy with Europe and the United States is full of contradictions. On one hand, it's the only country in the Middle East with NATO membership, which makes it crucial for defending NATO's interests. Overall, Turkey has one of the most strategic locations in the alliance. It sits right at the crossroads between Europe and Asia, and between the Black and the Mediterranean Seas. This gives the country a lot of bargaining power within NATO. Still, Turkey is struggling to truly fit in with the West. In 1987, Turkey tried to join the European Union to become economically allied with its European peers. After decades of talks, however, the accession process was halted based on ideological grounds. According to Brussels, Turkey's system isn't democratic enough, and it has a lack of human rights. And the problems aren't only ideological, but also geopolitical. Turkey has hostile relations with EU members Cyprus and Greece due to a, let's call it, complicated history. For nearly 400 years, Greece was a part of the Ottoman Empire. This occupation was peaceful for most of the time, but it ended violently during a war of independence. After 8 years of fighting, the modern state of Greece was founded. Because of the massacres on both sides, the relations between Greece and Turkey started on a terrible note. After World War I, where Greece and Turkey fought on opposite sides, the violence erupted once again. Greek forces invaded the Turkish mainland, but they were soon defeated. 100 years later, this decisive victory over Greece is still celebrated in Turkey. But for Greece, this was a tragic period. Many ethnic Greeks living in the coastal regions of Turkey were murdered. According to one study, 300,000 ethnic Greeks were killed during and after the conflict. In more recent times, the conflict between the two groups erupted once again in Cyprus. For decades, there were both Turkish and Greek communities on the island, creating enormous tension. Greek nationalists wanted to join Greece, which the Turkish communities viewed as a threat. Eventually, Turkey invaded the island in 1974. Other countries didn't agree with this move, and the United States imposed an arms embargo on Turkey shortly after. Right now, the island is split between the ethnic Greeks in the south and the ethnic Turks in the north. However, Turkey is the only country who recognizes northern Cyprus as a state. The rest of the world only recognizes the Republic of Cyprus, which is an EU member state and an ally of the West. What complicates this even further is the ongoing Aegean dispute between Turkey and Greece. The two nations disagree on their territorial waters, national airspace, and exclusive economic zones. On this map, you can see the overlapping claims between Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, and the unrecognized Republic of Northern Cyprus. This is an important issue because some of these territories hold natural gas reserves. Disputes like this have caused Turkey's relationship with the West to be in bad shape. The same is true for Turkey's stance on the war on Ukraine, which has also led to disagreements within NATO. This might not seem obvious at first. President Erdogan has said that Russia's invasion of the country is unacceptable, just like every other NATO member has. Over the last year, Turkey has also been a key military supplier for Ukraine. The Bayraktar drones in particular have played a crucial role in defending Ukraine against Russia. But Turkey isn't just supporting Ukraine, it's also helping Russia. Not in a military sense, but economically. After the war, Russia has become Turkey's largest import partner. In 2023, the trade volume between Russia and Turkey exceeded $65 billion. There is a simple reason for this. Turkey was one of the few NATO countries that didn't place heavy sanctions on Russia, despite international pressure to do so. This has allowed several Turkish companies to resell sanctioned goods from Europe and the US to Russia. This has also made the country a top destination for Russian oligarchs evading international sanctions. On top of that, Turkey is a transit route for Russian grain smuggling. Much of the grain that Russia has stolen from Ukraine is transported through Turkish ports. But the biggest effect on not sanctioning Russia has to do with energy imports. Because Moscow has lost many of its export partners, Turkey is now getting Russian oil, gas, and coal at a discount. Putin has even proposed to make Turkey a regional gas hub, seeing it as the most reliable export route to the rest of Europe. So you could say that Ankara isn't that tough on Putin, despite its support for Ukraine. The only thing that we can say about Turkey's foreign policy is that it's only following its own self-interest. We can also see this in the war in Syria, where Turkey is in an awkward situation with the United States. President Erdogan chose to support groups opposing the Syrian government, most notably the Free Syrian Army. The US also opposes the Syrian government, but it's not that simple. This chart shows just how complicated the entire war has become. The US supports the Syrian Democratic Forces, an alliance of Kurdish and Arab fighters against the Islamic State. Turkey doesn't like these Syrian Democratic Forces because of a possible link between its Kurdish faction and the PKK terrorist group. That's why President Erdogan has accused the US of supporting terrorists and causing a sea of blood in Syria. For Turkey, the PKK is a serious threat. The Kurds are an ethnic minority in Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and some of them want to start an independent state in this area. The PKK has used violence and terrorist attacks to try to achieve this. Recently, there was a bombing in Turkey's capital, Ankara, and this wasn't the first one. The conflict between the PKK and the Turkish government has been going on for decades, killing thousands on both sides. Because of this clash with the PKK, the Turkish military has attacked the Syrian Democratic Forces. In the north, Turkey has invaded Syria 4 times, the last operation being in 2020. President Erdogan wanted to create a buffer zone 30 kilometers deep into Syrian territory. This would protect Turkey against the Kurdish militias, and it would be a place to house Syrian refugees. But it remains a difficult situation, as the United States continues to support the Syrian Democratic Forces. On top of that, there have been accusations of Turkey committing human rights abuses in Syria. Other NATO countries aren't happy with Turkey's involvement in Syria, but the same can be said the other way around. The Turkish government has accused multiple countries of supporting the Kurdish separatist movement. This includes Sweden and Finland, who wanted to join the NATO alliance but were blocked by Turkey for months. They allegedly held PKK supporters within their borders, and Turkey wanted them to be extradited. The two countries have also imposed a partial arms embargo on Turkey in 2019 because of its involvement in Syria. Ankara wanted Sweden and Finland to lift this embargo, which they've done recently.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan arrived in Riyadh for talks on how to end the crisis.
Russian and Turkish military cooperation has been increasing recently, especially in light of Ankara's purchase of the S-400 missile system from Moscow.
Apart from its relations with the West, Turkey also has a complicated position in the Middle East. But before we dive into this, please hit the like button down below. It helps the channel a lot, because videos like these don't get very far without your support. Ultimately, you guys allow us to make these videos on topics like this. Alright, now let's get back to the basics. Let's first discuss Turkey's relations with one of the major powers in the region, Iran. Iran is the enemy of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. This is because of Iran's nuclear program and its regional proxy groups. For years now, the West has placed heavy sanctions on Iran because of this. However, Turkey strongly opposes these sanctions. In 2018, Erdogan blamed the United States and Israel for causing anti-government protests in Tehran. Afterwards, he said the sanctions were an opportunity to enhance bilateral ties with Iran. Especially in an economic sense, Turkey has only strengthened its relations with Iran over the past years. In a meeting with Iranian officials, Erdogan said bilateral trade has reached $7.5 billion as of now. I believe that we will achieve $30 billion. Currently, Turkey is considering to open new border crossings to its eastern neighbor. And the ties with Iran aren't just for bilateral trade, but also for geopolitical purposes. This was made clear during the 2017 Qatar diplomatic crisis. Because of a power struggle between several Gulf states, a Saudi Arabian-led coalition enforced a total blockade on Qatar. Turkey and Iran both opposed the Saudi coalition in support of the smaller nation. They do this because they want to curb the Saudi influence in the region. Iran has been fueling proxy conflicts with the Saudis for years now. This rivalry has become a Cold War in the Middle East. Turkey kind of likes what Iran's doing, as long as it's targeted at Saudi Arabia. But there are limits in Turkey's cooperation with Iran. The majority of Turkey's citizens have unfavorable views towards the country. The fact that Iran is trying to develop nukes doesn't benefit anyone in the Middle East. Most people in Turkey see this as a threat to regional security. And when we look at Turkey's regional ambitions, their interests don't fully align with those of Iran. Both Iran and Turkey want to become leaders in the Middle East, which has led to a strategic competition. The ongoing conflict in Syria is a prime example of this. Iran is allied with the Syrian regime and various proxy groups in the country. Because of its interest there, it has condemned the Turkish invasion and occupation of northern Syria. The same holds true in northern Iraq, where Turkey has military bases to fight the Kurdish separatists. Because Iran has ties with the government and some militias in Iraq, it doesn't like this Turkish influence. On one occasion, an Iran-backed group has even threatened to attack Turkish forces. And the Levant isn't the only place where there are tensions. In the Caucasus, Turkey and Iran also have conflicting interests. Turkey is a close ally of Azerbaijan, providing economic and military support to the country. It has good cultural and historic ties with Azerbaijan, as both countries are Turkic and Muslim. With the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict flaring up again, this became as relevant as ever. When Azerbaijan invaded the area, Erdogan came out in full support of his ally, saying that it needed to defend its territorial integrity. This is also because Turkey's relation with Armenia is, well, terrible, to say the least. After World War I, the Ottomans committed a genocide against the Armenian population, with an estimated 1 million Armenians murdered. To this day, Turkey doesn't recognize that this has happened, which strains ties with Armenia. Instead of saying sorry, Ankara has doubled down on its support for Azerbaijan. Turkey had provided $77 million in arms to its ally in the month before fighting broke out. This includes drones, rocket launchers, ammunition, and much more. The two countries have also signed a mutual defense agreement. According to Erdogan, Turkey and Azerbaijan are like one nation with two states. But meanwhile, Iran's relations with Azerbaijan are terrible. This is because of Western involvement in the country. American companies have interests in the Azeri oil business, and Israel is one of the main supporters of Azerbaijan's military. Between 2017 and 2020, Israel accounted for more than 60% of its weapons imports. Because its enemies support Azerbaijan, Iran has chosen to support Armenia. With Armenia's biggest ally, Russia, distracted in Ukraine, Iran is filling the vacuum. And there are even reports of Iran stoking the tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan, using it as a proxy against its pro-Western neighbor. According to the Iranians, Azerbaijan is a proxy of Israel and the United States. So this conflict in the Caucasus region is yet another field where Iran and Turkey are on opposing sides. Even though the Turkish government wants to expand cooperation with Iran, there's also serious strategic competition between the two countries. Turkey has the same kind of relationship with Saudi Arabia and its allies. On the one hand, they stand in the way of Turkey's regional ambitions. The Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has said that Turkey is part of the Triangle of Evil, together with Iran and the Islamist groups. He accused the country of trying to reinstate the Ottoman Empire, which he sees as a threat. Saudi Arabia sees itself as the leader of the Islamic world. The country houses two holy cities in Islam, namely Mecca and Medina, and it also has a large geopolitical say, as it's involved in many regional conflicts like the ones in Libya, Sudan, or Yemen. On top of that, it has the biggest economy in the region, just behind Turkey according to the IMF estimates. Saudi Arabia has a smaller military than Turkey, but not when it comes to spending. In 2022, the country spent $75 billion on its military, which is the fifth largest budget globally. Turkey's planned $40 billion budget is still far below this level. Despite the geopolitical rivalry, though, Turkey has expanded its economic relationship with Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states. Recently, President Erdogan visited Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates to make trade and investment deals. This includes a $40 billion trade deal with the UAE and plans for a similar deal with the Saudis. The Gulf states are particularly interested in Turkey's growing defense industry. In return, they will invest tens of billions of dollars into the Turkish economy. They've also provided currency swap agreements to Turkey, which help to stabilize its currency. But even though there's economic cooperation, there's also a lot of competition behind the scenes. The civil war in Libya was an example of this, before the ceasefire in 2020. Saudi Arabia has provided support for the Libyan National Army, joined by the United Arab Emirates. Turkey actively supported the Libyan government of national accord, a group opposed to the National Army. Turkey and the Gulf states were fighting each other by proxy, which obviously created a lot of tension. However, this wasn't the biggest proxy conflict between Turkey and Saudi Arabia. The Qatar crisis that we mentioned earlier was far worse. Turkey is a very close ally of Qatar, which is one of the few Gulf countries opposed to Saudi Arabia's leadership role. Although the tensions have cooled down since 2017, Qatar is still not in Saudi Arabia's sphere of influence. Turkey has taken advantage of this by stationing thousands of troops in the country and establishing a permanent military base there. This protection from Turkey allows Qatar to continue being independent from its neighbor. In turn, Turkey has received financial support from the fossil fuel-rich country. And with a military base in Qatar, Turkey also has a strong position in the Gulf region.
It's a rerun of the election in June when the ruling AK party lost its absolute majority and then failed to form a coalition government. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan cast his ballot on Sunday, hoping to return to single-party AKP rule after months of political uncertainty. The leader of the left-wing pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, Selahattin Demirtas, cast his vote in Istanbul, while Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu cast his ballot in Konya.
So, Turkey isn't afraid to stand up against the two major powers of the region, namely Iran and Saudi Arabia. Through military, political, and economic influence, Turkey wants to become its own regional leader. But to understand why the country is doing this, we also have to look at its history. You see, Turkey has long been a global center of power. During the 15th and 16th century, the Turkish state was one of the most powerful in the world under the Ottoman Empire. Turkish tribes began to expand their territories in the 1300s and continued to do so for several hundreds of years. Because of incredible military strength, this expansion was one of the most successful in the entire history. At its peak, the Ottoman Empire controlled most of the Middle East, southeastern Europe, and North Africa. It reached all the way from modern Austria to Yemen and from Ukraine to Egypt. In total, it covered 19.9 million square kilometers. For comparison, that's about 3 million square kilometers bigger than modern-day Russia. With their vast territories, the Ottomans controlled some of the most lucrative trade routes in the world. Almost all of the trade between Asia and Europe flowed through their lands, giving the empire tremendous prosperity. This lasted all the way to the end of World War I, which isn't all that long ago, historically speaking. Near its final days, however, the Ottoman Empire suffered a slow and painful demise. Its leaders became corrupt, its economy declined, and its military began to lose wars against other great powers. After World War I, the once thriving empire was partitioned into the countries that we know of today, creating the modern-day Middle East. This marked the end of Turkey's regional ambitions, for a while at least. The leader of the newly found Republic of Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, was focused on keeping the country internally stable. He wanted to be independent economically, politically, and militarily, and he opted for international isolation. But a few generations later, this policy was replaced by something completely new: Neo-Ottomanism. Just after the Cold War ended, the leaders in Turkey saw an opportunity to become a regional leader once again. The country had already abandoned its ideas of neutrality after it joined NATO in 1952, choosing sides in the US-Soviet Union rivalry. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Turkey's foreign policy began to be even more proactive. Under President Turgut Özal, Neo-Ottomanism became a central theme in Turkey's politics. Basically, the president wanted to make his country a regional leader once again. This followed the collapse of the Soviet Union, which opened up the playing field. He said that 3 important areas have opened in front of Turkey: the Balkans, the Caucasus, and the Middle East. Nowadays, these Neo-Ottoman ideas have gotten even stronger. As the Balkans, the Caucasus, and the Middle East descended into warfare and chaos, the public wants a strong Turkish state. This led to the rise of the nationalist Justice and Development Party, or AKP, with Neo-Ottoman policies. The AKP wants a say in regional affairs, backed by a strong military. And although the party doesn't like the term Neo-Ottoman, it's definitely a return to the past. The chances of another pandemic coming are low, but that doesn't mean that YouTube is not growing. In fact, YouTube just overtook Netflix in terms of how much time people spent on their TVs. And that's just television. Imagine how much time people are watching YouTube if you combine TV, phones, and computers. If you're waiting on a sign to start a channel, well, this may be the perfect one. And if you are looking to learn how people grow on YouTube in 2024, like this guy who got millions of views in just 2 months after starting, then I have the solution for you. We are opening up the waitlist for our first ever YouTube Basic Academy cohort. Here, we not only share the secrets we have learned about uploading for years on YouTube, we also share how we're able to start channels in completely different niches and scale them to millions of views in just a few months. We will also have live Q&As, a community where everyone can interact and learn from each other, and much more. If you want information on the cohort, then just click on the link in the description or scan the QR code that's on the screen right now. You can also sign up for the waitlist there.